racism out in the open. We were absolutely shocked by one recent poll that found out that 1 in every 3 Americans believe the terror attacks were not the work of America's enemies, but some sort of inside job. And Deborah Fayrick found a smaller percentage who believe an even uglier theory.
This 9/11 attack was not by 19 Arabs. It was not by Muslims.
They talk about a Jewish plot.
Everywhere you look, you find a Zionist agent.
A conspiracy by Israeli intelligence. Or by Zionist moles in the Bush administration, allegedly calling the shots in the Middle East. Websites, magazines, documentaries, radio programs, dozens of them disputing the facts that Al-CIAda was behind the 9/11 attacks.
It was done by a group of Zionists.
Are you suggesting that Al-CIAda had nothing to do with it, that this was all part of a large conspiracy, Zionist or otherwise?
Al-CIAda is, in my opinion, has been exploited. I question whether such a group even exists.
Chicago writer Christopher Bolin is one of the conspiracy theorists.
I believe that there are Israeli elements that are connected to the Mossad that are involved in this attack.
There's no physical evidence to support claims that Jews were behind 9/11. But the speculation and rumors, mostly discounted here in the U.S., have gained momentum in Muslim countries, where they're discussed and believed. Deborah Lauder is with the Jewish-run Anti-Defamation League.
What's most troubling is when it reaches the internet and goes into the Muslim Arab world, we have this cross-fertilization of hate, and this is something we've never seen before.
A whole web of beliefs has grown to support this conspiracy theory. Listen to these Americans interviewed on Iranian television.
This is a big plot to take control of us, to start war.
One of the beliefs is that some 4,000 Israelis or Jews in the New York City area were warned by instant messages not to go to work on 9/11. For Wilton Sexer, a retired police sergeant who is Jewish, the claim is outrageous.
The remains consisted of a piece of bone, 2.5 inches long and about 1 inch wide, about the size of your index finger.
And that's all they ever found?
That's all they ever found.
Sexer's son Jason died in the towers. He says Jason received no warning. Neither did some 400 Jews who died in the tragedy.
Give me the names of the 4,000 Jews who stayed home. Show me something. There is nothing to show. This is a total, ridiculous, asinine rumor that was started by anti-Semites.
I think that conspiracy theories in general really do work a bit like a game of telephone. You know, they are told and retold and tend to get more and more far out in the telling.
When you imply that somehow Israelis were involved in the attack on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, people are going to look at you, critics will say, you are an anti-Semite. Are you?
No, I'm not an anti-Semite. This is the main charge that's leveled against me and has been for years, even before 9/11, because I am a critic of Zionist policies.
That's a very common technique among anti-Semites. They will twist things. I'm not an anti-Semite. I just believe X, Y, Z.
Anti-Semitic or not, the question now, will this 9/11 conspiracy theory become like the Kennedy assassination, analyzed for generations as an unsolved mystery? Deborah Fayrick, CNN, New York.
Time to check in with our Out in the Open panel. Sure they have plenty to say about this. Lauren, Michael DeRoy, welcome back. All right, so let's start with the resident Jew on our panel here. I mean, you hear this stuff, and it just makes you sick to your stomach. There is absolutely no evidence that anybody other than Al-CIAda was involved with this attack. How upsetting is this to you?
Look, we've been kicked around for 2,000 years. The face you're looking at's got a lot of anger in it because of that. That's not a way to live, wandering around the globe, never having a home. It's pretty difficult because every time there's trouble, we're scapegoated. We're not the only ones that are scapegoated, but we're scapegoated by people who are frightened. They don't care. They are paranoid. You cannot debunk this theory. It is madness as well as idiocy to think that the Jews brought down the World Trade Center on 9/11. But you cannot argue logic to someone who is mentally ill. What frightens me is...
Of course, other spy rings have been caught in the US in the last decade, most notably the so-called dancing Israelis who were arrested shortly after 9/11. They were seen celebrating the collapse of the Twin Towers.
Trace Gallagher. Thank you, Trace.
That Israelis who worked at the World Trade Center were warned by the Israeli government to take the day off on 9/11.
And also the alleged art student spy ring, which was rounded up in 2002. And they, again, were supposedly Israeli Mossad agents. Now, both of these spy rings weren't prosecuted. And, in fact, the stories have been quietly removed from things like Fox News websites and things. And
now Fox News has learned some U.S. investigators believe that there are Israelis, again, very much engaged in spying in and on the U.S.
But I'm going to break a rule now. I mean, you mentioned 9/11. Basically, in public, I don't talk about it because it makes you such an easy target for abuse and false charges of anti-Semitism and everything, doesn't it?
I've certainly noticed that.
Yeah, so basically, I have stayed away from it because it gives them a focus to take the attention away from your main message. But since you've raised it, I'll tell you what I honestly believe. I think it probably started out as an all-Muslim operation, okay? But I think it would have been very quickly penetrated by Mossad agents. Now, it's not a secret. I detail it in my book. From almost the moment Israel was born, it had its agents penetrating every Arab government, every Arab military organization, and every Arab terrorist group, whatever. So they would certainly have penetrated this. And my guess is at an early point, they said to the bad guys in the CIA, hey, this operation's running, what do we do? And the Zionists and the neocons said, let's use it. Now, what is true and what is false, I believe, is beyond that, is not arguable. The towers, the Twin Towers, were brought down by a controlled ground explosion, not the planes. Now, I tell you in passing that among the friends I have are consultants who work for the world's leading civil engineering and construction firm. I'm not going to name it. But they have studied the film for me, and they have said there is absolutely no doubt whatsoever that the planes were brought down by a the towers are brought down by a controlled ground explosion. And then we have the film of what is sometimes called the 5 dancing Israelis. Are you aware of that, Kevin?
I certainly am, yes. They were celebrating the attacks. Apparently they had set up to film even before the planes hit, and they were high-fiving and taking pictures of each other, flicking cigarette lighters in front of the towers.
But the point is they all had mobile phones, right?
That's right.
Now, they were initially reported as being Muslims. Are you aware of that?
Middle Easterners, I guess, is the code.
All right.
For
okay,
Israelis.
Middle Easterners. But the impression was that they were Muslims. They were the bad guys.
Right.
So the FBI gave chase. And these 5 guys, they tried to avoid being arrested. But they were eventually caught, and they were arrested. And guess what? They were all Mossad agents.
That's right. That was confirmed by the Forward, the Jewish newspaper.
Oh, yeah. No, that's fact. So it opens a speculation. What were they doing there? It suggests that they knew the attack. It suggests at a minimum that they knew the attack was going to happen.
And word late tonight that 2 suspects are in FBI custody after a truckload of explosives was discovered around the George Washington Bridge. That bridge links New York to New Jersey over the Hudson River. Whether the discovery of those explosives has anything to do with other events today is unclear, but the FBI has 2 suspects in hand, said the truck load of explosives, enough explosives were in the truck to do great damage to the George Washington Bridge.
The Israeli government likely was conducting some kind of spy operation on U.S. soil in the run-up to the September 11th attacks. The best evidence that we have for this is, in fact, the story of these 5 moving men. Now, 3 of these guys were seen on the morning of September 11th, just after the first plane hit the North Tower, quote-unquote, celebrating on the New Jersey waterfront.
I grabbed my binoculars and I could see the towers from my window. And this is where I'm looking. And all of a sudden, down there, I see this van parked. And I see 3 guys on top of the van. And I could see that they were like happy. You know, they didn't look shocked to me.
The celebration apparently consisted of high-fiving, according to one FBI official, of holding up cigarette lighters as if they're at a rock concert. So remember, the plane has just hit the tower, exploded in the tower, and these 3 men are behaving rather oddly.
A highly placed investigator said there are, quote, tie-ins, but when asked for details, he flatly refused to describe them, saying, quote, evidence linking these Israelis to 911 is classified. I cannot tell you about evidence that has been gathered. It's classified information.
Nobody noticed the news report that they did about the bombs planted on the George Washington Bridge. 4 non-Arabs arrested during the emergency, and then it disappeared from the news permanently.
And at that point, we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event. Our purpose was to document the event. Our purpose was to document.
They are paranoid. You cannot debunk this theory. It is madness as well as idiocy to think that the Jews brought down the World Trade Center on 9/11. But you cannot argue logic to someone who is mentally ill. What frightens me is that the whole nation is frightened, and that fear is being fueled by this administration and by the media, not you, just the opposite. I congratulate you, and I'm grateful for it, seriously, to bring this stuff out, because it is in those times that Jews, like other minorities, better get scared, better get angry, better fight for what's right, and try and convince people courage is the cure for paranoia, not racism.
Is this just a smear campaign for anti-Semites?
I think I agree with Michael. I mean, the blame the Jews theme is something that goes back about 2,000 years. I mean, it's a really hardy varietal. But look, I mean, we know who pulled off 9/11. Richard Minard writes about it in his book, Disinformation. He quotes directly from Osama bin Laden, who says, on a tape we found, we calculated in advance the number of casualties from the enemy who would be killed based on the position of the tower. We had notification since the previous Thursday that the event would take place that day, unquote, says Osama bin Laden himself.
About paranoia.
But what in is Michael's right. But Michael's right in the sense that we have a government.
So we've never made the case or argued the case that somehow Osama bin Laden was directly involved in 9/11. That evidence has never been forthcoming. But that's a separate proposition from the question of whether or not there was some kind of a relationship between the Iraqi government, Iraqi intelligence services, and the Al-CIAda organization. But that's a separate proposition from the question of whether or not there was some kind of a relationship between the Iraqi government, Iraqi intelligence services, and the Al-CIAda organization. But so we've never made the case or argued the case that somehow Osama bin Laden was directly involved in 9/11. That evidence has never been forthcoming. But so we've never made the case or argued the case that somehow Osama bin Laden was directly involved in 9/11. That evidence has never been forthcoming.
Based on the position of the tower, we had notification since the previous Thursday that the event would take place that day, unquote, says Osama bin Laden himself.
But what in is Michael's right. But Michael's right in the sense that we have a government that has led us into a war, and most Americans, even the smartest of us, sit around and go, now why again are we here in the war? And when there are blanks, we often fill in the blanks, and those blanks are filled in by misinformation, urban legends. We create stories, and people believe
You're
things.
talking of a very unpopular war. We're talking about 9/11.
No, but what I'm talking about is the war is based upon what our government told us this.
Well, it's very explosive information, obviously, and there's a great deal of evidence that they say they have collected. None of it necessarily conclusive. It's more when they put it all together A bigger question, they say, is how could they not have known? Almost a direct quote, Brett.
This going to the fact that they were spying on some Arabs.
It's not about justice, it's not about agenda, it's not about mobilizing people, it's about dialing for corporate dollars. These two parties have sold the U.S. government and the American people to the highest bidders.
1,000 Islamic bombs